Good afternoon, everyone. This is Allie Mastardo, Senior Association Manager of PPRA. Thank you for joining us today for our last webinar in the 2021 How I Built This webinar series. Today, we will hear from Elmore County, Alabama on 17 years of network improvements. We do have you all on mute for the webinar, and we'll be using the question function on the sidebar of your screen for any questions. All questions will be answered at the end. The webinar is being recorded and a copy will be provided to all registered attendees via email and will be posted on roadresource.org. Today's facilitator is Grace Stansberry, Account Executive of Vario Consulting. As a marketing firm, PPRA partnered with Vario to create roadresource.org. We'll now turn it over to Grace.
Hello, everybody. Good afternoon or good morning, depending on where you are. We're excited to be here today. As Allie mentioned, this is a part of our 2021 webinar series. We'll be talking with Richie Beyer from Elmore County today. And the hope for this series is that we can share with you all stories about how networks have been improved, how people did it, and equip you with some of the tools to improve your road network as you go. Just a little bit about us. You may know my boss, Lindsay Matouche, who spends a lot of time in the industry doing speaking engagements. We are the builders behind roadresource.org. We are marketers and web designers. We are not pavement professionals, which is why we bring in folks like Richie to really tell the story and share the information that you all know. So if you have questions, feel free to type them in the chat as they come in, and I will direct them to Richie as we go through. And a little bit about the gentleman here on the other end of the line. He asked me not to read his entire bio because it is quite extensive. Richie has served in local government, working in 4 Alabama counties since 1993. And although much of his career has been in the county engineering arena, today he's employed by the Elmore County Commission as the first person ever to hold the position of Chief Operations Officer. He's responsible for the financial and administrative operation of more than $30 million annual budget and 265 employees at Elmore County. Richie is an avid advocate for the county and city level, and even testifying in Congress and national levels to advocate for the needs of cities and counties in the United States. He's served as the president of the Alabama and the National Associations of County Engineers, as well as the president of the County Commissions of Alabama Liability Self-Insurance Fund. In 2012, I'm going to keep going because it's a long list. In 2012, Richie was named the Alabama County Engineer and then was shortly followed thereafter in 2014 as the National Rural County Engineer of the Year. So there's a long list there and I could keep going. Richie serves on various committees from the National Center for Pavement Preservation to the Highway Research Committee at Auburn and the Alabama ATAP Center as well. So a long list of accomplishments there. And so we're happy to have you with us today, Richie. And I'm going to go through a little bit more of an intro to tell you a little bit about PPRA and who's bringing you this webinar to give you a bit of context. We are at PPRA made up of 3 associations: the Asphalt Emulsion Manufacturers Association, the International Slurry Surfacing Association, and the Asphalt Recycling and Reclaiming Association. And so those 3 organizations came together to form the Pavement Preservation and Recycling Alliance that serves one singular goal, which is to empower agencies to be the best possible stewards of their road networks and taxpayer dollars. And that's why we're here today, to give you the tools that you need to make an impact on your road networks and spend those resources as wisely as possible. As I mentioned before, the goal of this series is to talk to high performers across the country who are demonstrating network progress, are using a large toolbox of treatments, and are making their dollars stretch further. So if you're interested to learn more about the ways to get this done at large, roadresource.org/better is a great place to get started. So this whole thing started in 2016 with a research project where we talked to hundreds of engineers, road managers, and contractors, manufacturers, and whatnot throughout the industry, where we talked to all these people who were doing great work on their networks, and we found that there were 4 sort of main traits that were consistent across everybody who was gaining ground on their road networks. Number 1, These high performers were using a robust toolbox of treatments and applying all different treatments appropriately. There was a little bit of a Swiss Army knife for fixing problems rather than just using the same tools over and over to fix the network. Number two, they think about the network at large. And number three, they're drawing on the successes of other agencies and learning from others in their region. So that's a goal of this, is to try and help everybody understand what is going on out there in the industry outside of their neighborhood. And then lastly, in touch with the industry at large. I read through Richie's bio, and you can see how it really is important to be plugged into all the resources that are available out there. And then there was one sort of different, we called this a little bit of a chemical X, that for the most part, agencies who are gaining ground on their networks are not afraid to be the challenger, not afraid to buck the status quo. And that's something that we think is really worth calling out, that if you want to make things, if you want to make a change, oftentimes it takes a little bit of extra of all those opportunities that are coming your way. So this is a little bit of our, you may have seen our ads listed around the industry. That's the thinking behind that as well. So today what we're going to talk about, we're going to talk a little bit about Elmore County at large. We're going to ask Richie how he changed the status quo and what it took to create buy-in across elected officials, taxpayers, residents, and even occasionally internal teams as well. And then we'll look at where the network is today. So it's a really unique situation at Elmore County. As you could tell from the title of the webinar, they have been working through pavement preservation and optimizing the network for over 17 years. And it's really a compelling story to see how those results have played out over time. So with that, I'm happy to hand it over to the expert. Richie, tell us a little bit about Elmore County.
Grace, thank you for having us here today, and I'm honored to be able to talk about the work that's going on here from our team at Elmore County. And as you mentioned, the 17 years goes back to 2003 when I arrived here as the new county engineer, and our network and population both are continuing to grow. And the county at the time was in a position where they were having very difficult time trying to even establish a program. They had nothing in the way of an inventory that gave them a consistent accounting for their roads. And so on this slide right here, you kind of see our current statistics. You know, we're in the neighborhood of about 1,000 miles of roadway. I think in exact terms, we have like 843 miles now of paved road and a little less than 200 unpaved. That operating budget, though, until 2019, that's been our standard. It varied from year to year depending on some grants that would come in, $4 to $5 million a year, and so we were in a position where we had roughly $5,000 a mile to try to maintain all our roads. So encountering that challenge, you really had to take a different approach. And so the commission that hired me back in the early 2000s was definitely open for change and trying to figure out ways to make their county better. And so it created a good atmosphere for somebody that was willing to try some different things to put the commissioners in a good position. If you go to the next slide. This next slide here shows you a comparison between us and Elmore County and our state DOT. As many of you know, most citizens have no idea who owns the road, who maintains the roads in their respective areas, and so they just expect to see whatever is happening on the best maintained road to continue elsewhere. And so part of our discussion years ago, decade and a half ago, was just making sure people understood the difference in the funding mechanisms and how that parlayed into what we could do in Elmore County. So it's a pretty substantial difference between our DOT and the county. And I know there's all sorts of factors that go into what our DOT does with their funds besides just strict maintenance. But is a pretty good comparison for people to understand that there was a fraction of the money available. So this is also a good tool for our commissioners, because if you go to the next slide, you will see where our network was at that time. We had well over 50% of our roads in a poor to failing condition. We had no methodology on how to approach that problem. A lot of times it was just worst first. It was whoever was calling the commissioner the most would get some attention. And as Grace so eloquently talked about at the very beginning, they weren't necessarily doing the right treatments to even address the problem. Sometimes it was just, hey, let's just put down a lift of asphalt and make it ride good and get us through to the next election cycle. And so that was kind of the challenge that we had, was to get our commissioners to understand worst first was not the right approach. And through a lot of education on our own end, a lot of research that was done, a lot of help from people like Larry Galehouse with formerly with the National Center of Pavement Preservation, we were able to get some tools in place to start educating our commissioners on what we needed to do to get things back in a better condition. Grace, if you want to go to the next slide.
I think that's it's a neat perspective to see. So you started out with roads in such poor condition, and I talked with Richie for a while before we got to this webinar, and what really struck me was the game plan that he put together to make a change. And what we've attempted to do here is draw out the sort of strategic pillars of his game plan. He shared with me that it was important that in order to manage these roads successfully and to make a change, they needed a strategic allocation of their limited funds. They needed to try out new treatments to prove that they could work. Number one, prove and understand how to apply new treatments and new tools for their network. They needed a consistent data collection and an inventory of their roads. The point being, you can't win the game if you don't know the score. Richie took on the massive role of creating this engagement of his decision makers and the elected officials who are involved in the process of prioritizing projects each year based on data and the needs of the network. So we're going to talk through a lot of that today. And then, of course, resident communications. Richie shared that a lot of this really hinges on a plan that residents can understand. When you get complaints that come in, you can sort of refocus the conversation around, look, it's not just about your road. Our plan is to improve the community as a whole. And so these are sort of the 5 pillars that we see to really unbraid a lot of the work that Richie's going to talk through here today. Would you add anything to that?
No, I think that's perfect lead into the next few slides about the different trials and things of that nature. And the information that we're going to talk about over the next few slides specifically were, an ongoing conversation with not only the public but our elected officials, and in some cases our staff, to try to get them in a position where they understood how to be able to communicate what we were doing and how we were going about trying to make repairs to the network as a whole. But we weren't focused on just fixing the worst roads out there. So one of the techniques that has been a very valuable tool in our arsenal is the implementation of full depth reclamation. So many people, when we talk about pavement preservation, they don't think that that's an element of pavement preservation. But if we wouldn't have had the ability to do some of the full depth reclamation that we do in-house, we would have never got to a place that we could have advanced past, some simple surface treatments and typical overlays with hot mix asphalt. So we were able to do some work to get the comfort level of the commissioners to understand why we needed certain equipment, why we could stretch our resources out, not only from a material standpoint, but also a time and equipment standpoint. And we were able to take things and projects that would take us, say, 3 weeks to accomplish, when we started doing our FDR in-house, we were able to do them in a few days, 3 days, 4 days time frame, and get a road in a position where traffic was always able to traverse the road, didn't necessarily have to close the road down at any one time where it was a problem. But it gave us all these different options on how we could take the pavement preservation techniques and be able to put them onto our network. One of the other tools that we really, the county had done for years and years is on the next slide, and it is the surface treatments. We were able to take those surface treatments and be able to stretch those out in such a way to where we were doing strip patching, we were doing full, double surface treatments, AKG treatments, things of that nature. And now we were able to do that in such a way to where now we could marry them up with some of the other techniques like slurry seals, microsurfacing, fog seals, things of that nature. Started using the ability to try some thin lifts and not just use our typical 1.5 inch, 2 inch overlays. And it allowed us to start really stretching our resources in a way that instead of 4 or 5 miles a year that we're getting really addressed, we were in that range where we were getting from 20 to 30 miles a year on our network addressed. So now one of the things that I'll say about these treatments and all, and I don't think the purpose of this webinar is about talking about all the different treatments, but there's a lot of pain and gain in going through those treatments. There's a lot of staff time spent on the research. We talked to the industry about what to do. We tried to find the right treatment and put it on the right road. And I'm telling you, it is very important for you to have a very good ability to communicate with the industry to where you have some level of comfort of what they're going to help you through when you have these issues. I mean, we have a great number of partners, Ergon, Vance Brothers. Those two companies have tremendously helped us, and they weren't always the successful bidder on our projects, but they were some of the greatest resources we had as we were developing our program. And our county commission and citizens are well off for that partnership. On the next slide, you can kind of see how we broke down over time the different treatments that we have. We've got a number of different calculations here for our mileage. I told Grace the other day while we were preparing for this webinar that, in some cases, people look at the number of miles treated and see, it looks like a ballpark estimate. Well, the reason that is like for the FDR, for example, we have touched just about every one of our road projects over the last 15 to 16 years in some shape, form, or fashion with some of that maintenance work and doing the strip patching on them, doing crack sealing, things of that nature. And so all these techniques are just something that we have. The term everybody likes to have is a tool in your toolbox. They're such great treatments to be able to be used, but you got to make sure you marry them up with the right road and the right conditions. And sometimes we would start a project and get the planning going, and by the time we got ready to get close to letting the project, maybe that treatment still wasn't the right one and we'd have to adjust. So you have to have a group of staff members, you have to have a group of elected officials that understand that and are able to adapt. I think one of the most important things to understand before we go to the next slide about payment criteria is I keep mentioning the elected officials, and they have a job as the elected representatives for our citizens to try to keep government services in a efficient and effective method. So as previously as the county engineer and now my new role, I spend a lot of time trying to make sure that they have the information they need to make them successful. And by doing that, you find some that become champions in these different areas. And we've been fortunate enough to start out with one commissioner that was our champion. And then by the time that commission was up for election and into the next cycle, some got reelected, the group of champions grew for us. And it's made it to where now, even as recent as last month, when we had FP2 come and give an award to our commission for our pavement preservation program. I mean, they take pride in that, and they take a lot of ownership in the fact that our county is in a position where we're doing everything we can with our limited resources. So I think that's an important thing for people to not miss. And as engineers, sometimes we get too tied up in the technical aspect and showing them, you know, the black and white way that something ought to be, instead of having that skill to be able to operate in that gray area and be able to give them the ability to deal with the public and be able to sell a program like what we have here in our county.
Before you move on, Richie, what strikes me most about this toolbox are the years implemented and the gradual growth of your toolbox over time. Can you talk a little bit about how you bring on a new treatment and what makes you, where do those decisions come from as you bring on new treatments into the toolbox, and how does that process work?
Okay, that's a very good question. And to be honest with you, it has come about in a couple different ways. The original champion that I mentioned, we had kind of talked through the different techniques, and when we started going from the pavement preservation, the FDR process with some of our chip seals, and we started talking about ways to do cape seals and things like that. He actually did a little research and brought some things to my attention to where we actually made some site visits to some other areas of the country, and were able to see some successful applications. We never once took on too many projects at one time with trying to implement some of the new techniques, but we also weren't scared of them either. We had staff. I have staff members that understand the preservation mantra and are trying to do everything we can to stretch our resources. And so we would do some systematic little test sections on roads that we thought that we would have the ability, if we didn't have success, that we weren't going to have a major political problem or major issue with the public. And we were able to do those in successful ways that we were able to either figure out what the issues were and adjust before we did them on a more high volume section of road, or we were able to adjust and be able to tweak the process altogether. I'd probably say one of the best examples of that is when we started slurry sealing, and the product we were using took a long time to cure out, and we ended up having a good number of locations where we had a long period of time where the public couldn't get on it, and we learned and adjusted in that first year of implementation, and by the next year we had changed into doing more on the side of micro, and then that kind of took off for us. So we've done fog seal applications on a number of different routes, some trial and error, and I would say that's another place where, you know, our industry people were right there in the trenches with us and helping us along the way, and didn't just say, hey, here's the product, here's what you go do, and then walked away from us. So so a lot of different things that went on, and there was a lot of staff time spent with not only the public, but with the industry trying to figure out, the commissioners and the industry trying to figure out what's the best mix of projects. So.
Great, thank you. With that, my role here is to share with you a couple ways that you can look to expand your own toolbox using some of the resources that the PPRA has put together. If you're not already familiar with this website, this is roadresource.org. It's free to all. There's no membership required. And again, this comes with the sole purpose of equipping city, county, and state road managers to make the best possible decisions for their road network and resources. So Richie talked through a little bit of how that treatment selection and trial process works for them. a great place to get started. The good news is it's not 2004 anymore, and a lot of these trials and research has played out over the course of time for you all to benefit from and learn from. And we have compiled quite a bit of that research in one place to make it easy to understand how to expand your toolbox. So I'm going to first start here under treatment toolbox. If you look at this section, what treatment is right for my road, we found that that was the #1 question that agencies were asking in how to apply treatments, right time, right place. I'm going to take you over here to this first tool. It's the pavement criteria tool. We affectionately call this the ice cream sandwich, where you can see a cross section of a piece of pavement at varying levels of deterioration. And this is designed to help you get a sense for what treatments might be applicable in different situations, in different pavements. So if you try this out, all you have to do is input a little bit of information about your pavement. In this example, I'll use my pavement condition, I'll call it a B for a given piece of pavement. If you're not familiar with pavement condition, there's more information where you can go to make assumptions to just get some of the learning started. I'll input a little bit of primary distress. Let's say that there's moderate rutting. You can see as I input some of these criteria, these treatments over here on the left gray out. And right now I'm left with microsurfacing as a primary option. That's due to that moderate rutting. Microsurfacing is one of the only treatments aside from cold cleaning and micromilling which can address rutting. So those two treatments show up as suggestions for this piece of road. And then additionally, you can include all kinds of other criterias as well. And of course, there's many more factors to consider when you're making assessments and condition assessments for your roads. So nothing can replace sitting down with an expert and saying, hey, what should I try here? What is applicable here? But this is a great place to get some learning started. So you can go here, learn a little bit about that, as well as grabbing more information on each treatment. I'll take you to the Treatment Resource Center in just a moment. But we showed this tool to a couple agencies for beta testing, and they said, well, that's great, but what if I don't know the pavement condition of my road? What if I don't know what the primary distress is? So there's another way of going about including some pavement assessment that's here in the photo tool, which you can also get to from this way. And essentially, this tool is designed to help road managers understand what primary distress is impacting a given road. So you can go through and look at photos of roads and say, well, that kind of looks like what's going on with my road. What's going on in this photo? And it suggests it lets you know what the primary distress is in this given photo, and a couple possible solutions where treatments could be applicable, as well as any secondary distresses. So Richie talked about the learning process and trying out new treatments. We know that there's a lot involved in feeling confident in applying a new treatment on your road. As the sort of stewards of the public's roads, many road managers are really protective of the new things that they try. So one place that you can go to learn more and feel more confident about new treatments is here under the Treatment Resource Center, where you can select from 18 different treatments and see a menu of information from everything from an overview of the treatment itself to issues addressed, benefits that you can expect from that treatment, and even common combinations where we're seeing in the industry people are layering mixes of fixes on top of each other for hybrid road sections in these ways that can not only save money but also create better performance. So on this menu, this is a great place to go to learn more. You can learn about process and variations, expectations. We know that a treatment applied at the wrong time in the wrong place will not have the same performance as a right time to time treatment. This is where you can go to understand a little bit of how when you apply a treatment, where to apply it and what to expect in that given situation, as well as photos of roads. Instead of just showing you an old road and a new road, what we have shown is as the treatment ages, for many of these treatments, you can see what it looks like 5 years down the line, 10 years down the line, to understand a little bit about what to expect. You can learn pre-construction needs as far as site selection goes, mix design, into construction, learn about how to prepare the road, equipment that will be used, how the application process works, And then down to quality assurance, testing, inspection protocol. We heard a lot of questions. I know I should test X, Y, and Z. What else do I need to know? So you can find lists of tests that you need to complete for each treatment. And then finally, at the bottom here, we have research and performance and success stories. Check this out. Oftentimes you will be able to find a success story of a treatment in your region, in your area, and you might be able to see, if not in your region or your area, in your climate. And you can see how different treatments are being used on roads similar to your own, where you can learn a little bit more about all kinds of different stories from agencies just like you, and including photos as well. So that is the treatment toolbox on the road resource site. We're going to come back to the site in just a little bit, but for now I'm going to hand it back over to Richie.
Well, I told Grace while we were preparing for this webinar, I wish that resource would have been available to us, you know, back in the early 2000s when we were having to really do a lot of it on our own, reaching out to some of the front runners in pavement preservation. Some of the agencies have been doing it for a long time, and you know, I guess the only thing that some people can overthink, again, back to being an engineer, is when you start getting into the way that you evaluate the pavements. I think the most critical thing is to have some system that you can have some consistency with in your local government area, and in my case in a county. And so we spent a good bit of time at the very beginning of getting our inventory of teaching our inspectors, you know, what we were looking for in terms of pavement distresses. So it is nice to have a resource like Grace just showed, where you know, you can basically turn somebody on a website and they can look at some of the distresses instead of having to just go out and learn through the experience of going down a county road. Our in-house crews do evaluate our pavements every 2 years. We have our engineering staff takes those. It takes us about 6 weeks to do everything that we need to do on our road inventory. We were fortunate enough that there were already measures in place with our state DOT that the counties were doing for any kind of project that we were expending federal or state funds on. And so at the time, many people didn't really think that was a good thing for us to have to do, but in a lot of places it was the only tool that most counties had to prioritize some investment of some federal aid funding that was made available to us. So we took that 100-point scale that they had. It was roughly half on safety items and half on pavement items, and we extracted the pavement items and were able to create our own grading system. So we don't use the typical PCI calculations and things of that nature. Ours is just like you would in school. To be able to get a grade on your pavements, it's fairly easy to tell whether your pavement conditions are graded, you know, an A to an F. And to be honest with you, that has worked well for us, because that really resonates with the elected officials and the public. They understand that better than telling them what the PCI rating is. Again, back from putting it into some terminology, it makes it a little easier to communicate with the public versus something that is more technical and from an engineering standpoint. Now we spend that time, we do that every 2 years, we evaluate our pavements, and then we also take our treatment cost and put that out there on a spreadsheet for our elected officials to be able to review with us. And even though the engineering staff does our own recommendations, we give that information to our elected officials. So when it's time for us to be able to adopt our annual program, they understand where the information's coming from, and they're able to look at roads that maybe they travel a good bit versus ones that are in another part of the county and another commission district. So it's a simplistic way to do it, but it's also a very effective way. We keep all that in a database, and we can generate maps through our GIS system off that database and give them visual tools to use to show where we've got our needs at. And then on the next slide, it shows a little bit about how we tie that back to traffic volumes, and we use that to help the commission be in a position where they can take our list of suggested projects and either shortlist them or be able to agree with our recommendations. So they are always involved in the process, and I probably spent a lot of time talking about that so far, but I really think that's one of the main keys to our success. I mean, it takes staff that is passionate about it, that has a drive and desire to make their county better. But at the same token, if you don't have those elected officials who are the ones that are setting the budgets and setting those overall priorities, and are the ones, to be honest with you, the ones that get the calls from the residents because they believe they elected them and they didn't elect whoever the county engineer is going to be. In our county, we're not elected. Only a few states have elected county engineers. And so as an appointee or a public employee in general, you know, they have a different way of relating to the elected officials. So it just it's been very successful for us that those elected officials understand where this is coming from. And also, when you have roads that are in a similar condition and you start talking about traffic volumes and things like that, sometimes it's the treatments you're putting down, maybe the cycle that you're putting those treatments down. Maybe this year we're doing a number of projects that are focused in with say microsurfacing. So we want to do a big package of micro this year. Next year it may be a thin lift package. So we partner all that up in such a way to where we're very cognitive of the way that they get feedback from the public, and then we also look at that information in such a way where we're trying to drive our decisions by not only data, but also the amount of work that those roads are creating for our own workforce, so we can be more efficient. For example, if you're spending a lot of time patching roads or doing some kind of seal work on them, you know, those may get accelerated and catch them before they drop to that next level for a more costly treatment. And you got to have a group of people at the decision-making level for your budgets that understand the general concepts of that. So we spend a lot of time making sure they understand what we're doing and why, and that all goes back to the way that we create the inventory, the way we display that to them, the way we communicate that with them and arm them with that. And some of y'all are probably sitting on the other line, end of the line, thinking, well, that must be a lot of time you spend with your elected officials. It's not really a lot of time we spend with them. It's the way that we give them compact data sets, and we give them information in such a way where it's very easy for them to take that in. So any of you who have done anything on Capitol Hill or at your state legislature understand that if you get beyond the front and back of a page to give information, then you pretty much have lost your audience. And so we do a good job of trying to give them that in a very succinct way, and then they get a copy of the inventory and they can go through the inventory if they want. But I would venture to guess that a lot of times, unless there's just a specific road they're looking for, they use the electronic file for that. But if I give them a hard copy, it's just a nice little paperweight on their desk at home, because they're not going to go through there and spend the time to handle that. That's our job, is to get them in a position where they understand, and then they can look at those key routes for them. So a lot of information about prioritization, but I think besides the fact that I keep driving home with the elected officials and how we've educated them, is we really have tried to keep our process very simple. We're not riding our roads with you know, the technology that can measure cracks and all that kind of stuff. You know, all that's great, and would be nice to have as an engineer to be able to say I have that data, but it's not really necessary for us. and it's not really the in our application, not the best use of our resources. We're trying to get as much on the road as we can, and we feel like this way is definitely been very successful for us.
Thank you. Yeah, it's what I hear from agencies is that prioritizing process can be highly driven by data. It can be a spectrum from completely based in data or based in political requests, taxpayer complaints, and any range between that space. And it sounds like the intentionality that you carry by providing that short list and letting your decision makers have buy-in and sort of put their fingerprints on the plan with what they believe to be the best for the community within the bounds that you've given them to maintain that sort of efficient use of resources. Sounds just like a really neat hybrid that I have not seen much of. So interesting to consider. What we will do now is share with you one of the prioritizing tools on road resource. This tends to be one of the biggest areas of confusion for agencies because oftentimes they're looking at a network that is failing across the board. And so as you hear people talking through pavement preservation, it's important to keep your good roads in good shape. Often the response that we get is, well, how do I do that when I've got X number of roads that absolutely need repairs to for the network? And so this is a tool that will help you prioritize quantitatively rather than based on gut or politics or any other things that often can come into that mix. Before I jump into that, because it's a calculator tool, I'm going to give you a little bit of background about the website at large. If you're not familiar already, this website has a number of calculator tools that are designed to help you optimize your network and understand some of the concepts that are at play with deterioration and improvement and how those are related to each other. And so the first thing that you should know, using these calculator tools, this is equivalent annualized cost. This is just an example quickly. This gives you the idea of the cost per square yard based by the life extension of the treatment. So this is a really simple equation. It's just cost per square yard divided by life extension. So you're comparing apples to apples on your treatments. Across the website, you will see costs and life extension figures associated with treatments that auto-populate as you go through. One thing to know about that, those are 2016 international averages. So we surveyed agencies around the country asking what prices they were getting. So one thing we know about averages is they're never quite accurate for everybody. You're either higher or lower. So we wanted to make sure that this website was customizable and usable to everybody so that you could input your own expectations and costs as well. So number one, across the board, any of these calculator tools you can modify and update as you go through. Any of this stuff is editable and reactive. If you don't want to go through and spend time updating all of the calculators as you're using this tool, all you have to do is create a user profile. This is an example. I'll take you to my account here where I can dictate whether I'm using US dollars, Canadian dollars, my measurement units as well. And then down here below, you have a list of treatments and inputs where you can update their unit cost, their life extension, and in many cases, if it's a structural treatment, you can enter a structural coefficient, whether or not that treatment adds strength to the road, and then a unit cost per square yard per inch as we're looking at the strength of those lifts. So once you enter your data here in the back end, it stays completely unique to you. PPRA never sees that. We don't share that with anybody. But what it does do is give you consistent numbers across the use of the website's tools so that the numbers that you're evaluating both in cost and in performance are relevant to your network. You can also create custom treatments here if you use treatments that you don't see already listed. And then you can see the list of your custom treatments here below. So before you, when you start to use these tools, before you do anything, that's the first place to start. Create an account, and as you go through and update numbers, it will become more and more customized to your needs. So when we think about prioritizing, back to what Richie was saying, when we think about prioritizing projects, that can happen any number of ways. One of the ways we can quantitatively evaluate projects and our getting the best bang for our buck is by using a cost-benefit value score. And so this score evaluates a number of variables to help you sort of score out your road segments and decide where you're going to spend your money most effectively. It looks at traffic, which oftentimes we use a constraint factor to make some of these numbers more on a more reasonable scale. That constraint factor essentially just limits this score from being on a scale of 1 to 100, which, as Richie mentioned, is much easier for people to digest and understand. This doesn't actually change the prioritization. So it looks at traffic, life extension, that's the added life you expect to get from a given treatment, unit cost, how much does that treatment cost, and PCI, or the current condition of the road that you're looking at treating. So this cost benefit value score takes into account how many people will be impacted, how much is it going to cost me, and how much is my road going to get better. And so when we look at a two-road comparison, evaluating two projects in this example, road 1, we look at a worst first approach. We're doing our worst road in the network, which is going to require a reconstruction. Let's say that the AADT, that's the average annualized daily traffic on that road, is 5,000. Right now it's in bad shape, a PCI of 30. When we plug in these variables, so you can see the traffic as well as the PCI represented here. This 25 years is, we expect to get 25 years of life from this reconstruction treatment. And then we expect to pay $39 per square yard in this example. When we calculate all that out, it gives us a CVV score of 15. Now compare that to road 2, which in this case has the same amount of traffic, but we're going to be doing a chip seal because it's in better condition. You can see the higher PCI score, and it's a lower unit cost for that chip seal. However, we expect to get about 6 years of life in this situation. So again, we're going to crank all those numbers out using this formula, and you get a CVV score of 29. That higher score lets you know that your money is going further using these variables. So when we see that played out, down here below is an example of 8 road segments and proposed treatments for these roads. Right now, they're listed worst first. So you can see the pavement condition going from low to high in this column. And this green highlight denotes our budget. So in this example, when we're prioritizing the worst roads first, we're able to address 3 of these road segments and projects. Now, if you look on the right, we've scored each of these with a CBV score here on the far right. If we, instead of prioritizing based on condition, prioritize by CBV, you can see that we are able to cover, using the same budget, 7 roads instead of 3. Why is that? It's because we took this south road that was high unit cost and low traffic value. All of those things were pretty big impact influences into this. Dropped out that south road and said, maybe we'll get that next year, and instead distributed that budget over these other road segments. So that is how CBV can play out in helping you prioritize your roads. Now, this is not a proprietary equation or anything. You can work this out on any of your roads. We have built a calculator. There we go. We've built a calculator to help you prioritize in this situation. I'm not going to run an example for the sake of time. Next week is our in-depth training. It's a virtual training. I'll share some more information at the end of this for you, where you can see we're teaching how to use all of these tools on the website. This is a great place to learn. I'll just show you a little bit of how it works. You enter your total network lane miles, you'll enter a budget, and then you enter information about your road segments here, including the PCI, traffic, width, all of those things. And then you'll select a given treatment. And when you enter length and whatnot, it will score it out a CBV value for you, and you can prioritize based on worst first and CBV. One of the biggest questions we get about this tool is, what is the AADT constraint? Again, that's a figure that doesn't reprioritize anything. It doesn't influence the equation. What it does is apply a dampering effect to the traffic levels. For example, traffic levels in LA County are very different than traffic levels in Elmore County. And so what that does is make a more equivalent scale to compare numbers among your own network. So try out the cost benefit value calculator. There's a number of other calculators here to help you optimize your network. And again, if you're interested in that, we do offer much more in-depth training on how to use these tools. There are little tips and tricks here and there on how to use tools as you go through the website. So, whoops. There we go. We know that you can do all the best data-driven decision-making in the world, but if you run into hurdles internally or externally, oftentimes the greatest plans can get derailed for a number of different reasons. And so Richie has done a lot of work in this arena, making sure that great work can happen in his county. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, and just to dovetail on what you just left off with the cost benefit, there was a good bit of time spent as part of our education with our elected officials, showing them the health of our network and how we could take our resources that we had in our tax revenue and be able to stretch that. So a lot of the calculations that Grace showed y'all on the previous slides are similar things that we put into a one-page report card for our commissioners back in the early 2000s, and we've done that since in terms of the treatments and the cost at the time. We did something similar with average cost, and we were able to give them that information. That communication with the elected officials starts from day one when they get elected. I think in my 6 election cycles here, my commissioners run every 4 years. I think I've had one commission where every single commissioner returned, and that second term was fairly easy from a staff standpoint in terms of getting them up to speed on policies and our program and things of that nature. For the most part, we've had a majority of them come back every time. Most of them have either retired or stepped away from public service. A few have been defeated, but the information is still the same. And having that ongoing education for those commissioners and having returning commissioners that can be an advocate for the program are definitely very, very big positives. We talked to them about not only the past program and how it came to be, and where we look to go in the future and our grading system, but we also talk about the way the plan is shaped, and we try to take in things that are important to them and try to figure out how those mesh with the plan. Sometimes they do, sometimes they don't. But when we operate in our system with our commissioners, the majority rules on how we go. So having that ongoing education with each of them helps in a lot of cases. And I would say that for the most part, as the new ones come on, they definitely gravitate towards the leadership ability of ones that have been in office and have been through those fires before. As I mentioned before, and I keep honing in on this, the key part for them is just understanding the program in such a way that they can explain it to the public. Them having involvement in the development of the program is key to that. And then also just understanding the general concepts and principles of the preservation and recycling programs that we do, and why those are so key to stretch every single dollar that we have as far as possible. One of the things that we have started doing is the way that we communicate with our residents. When you start talking about pavement preservation techniques in general, you end up putting information out there through either the local media or in some cases door to door to make sure the public understands the different aspects of the treatment from the standpoint of what does it mean to them as they're driving up and down the road, or delays they're going to have. putting up the orange construction signs. Everybody wants to naturally just complain because it's interrupting their everyday schedule. So we've tried to figure out ways, especially in the last 5 to 6 years, where we really are using our social media platform. That helps us with our local media too, because it gives them ready-made stories to be able to utilize, whether it's about ongoing projects, the successes that we've had in stretching our dollars, or maybe it's just about the way our program's being put together and developed, and getting that information out. So we've got a number of different ways for that to play out. You see some of them here on the screen between our website, blog, and our EMA app with road closures and projects, and then just our social media feeds. So all that information is critical for them to be able to use to work with the public. The next slide is something that I'm getting some feedback, Grace. I don't know what that is, but in 2019, our state passed what's called the Rebuild Alabama Act. And one of the key components of that additional excise tax on gas and diesel fuel was that we had to promote our projects on a public website, and we had to have that up for the public to see all the time. Well, for us, that was fairly simple for us to do because that was something we were already doing with our projects over the last decade. We were able to, every time the commission adopted a list of projects for the coming fiscal year, we were able to have that in a position where it was already accessible to the public. What you see in front of you here is just one of the programs for Rebuild that shows the different projects that had complete funding out of the Rebuild gas tax, diesel tax that comes directly to our county, and then projects that we were leveraging that money for on the federal aid system. We were able to take projects that we were getting money out of our local MPO or from our state DOT, and we were leveraging to do improvements on our network. And so this kind of tool right here is gold for those commissioners. I mentioned, being able to have a couple quick documents for them to be able to refer to. When they have a list showing the roads that are going to be done, they have a map, and they can show that to their constituents, whether it's a digital version, emailing them a link, or be able to show them at a civic club meeting or something of that nature. It's just so valuable to them, so that the public understands that not only is there a plan in place, but their elected officials are going in a systemic way to try to address the road network and the road system.
Yeah, thank you for going through that. For the sake of time, I won't play through some of these things, but oops, looks like it wants to play anyway. We have a number of, Richie just talked through a lot of the communication tools that they're leveraging at Elmore County. What is coming out from PPRA is designed to equip you with just that. Right around the end of the year, we'll be debuting this agency communication toolbox, which includes everything from outdoor notifications, yard signs, and door hangers that you can grab, customize, throw your logo on, copy and paste from the website, anything that you want, however you need to use those tools to notify the public, as well as a draft press release where all you need to do is input the relevant information to your network, and you can debut that to your local media to get some of the same coverage that Richie was talking through, and then pre-built social media posts for you to communicate what's going on with your plan as well. Those will be coming down the pike very shortly. For the sake of time, I won't dive into them. We've got just about a few minutes left. We might keep you for a little bit longer so Richie can talk through his network. Just a quick plug. We'll be sending out materials to you all about these more in-depth training. Next week, we're doing our Roadvocate training where you'll learn to use all of the tools on the website in detail. And then following that, we have a webinar which is designed to educate elected officials about what road networks need. Richie has spoken on that quite a bit today, but we'll dive deeper on December 14th. So join us for that one. I'm going to skip through here. So Richie, in just the last few minutes, You've told us, the road that it's taken to get here over the last 17 years. Tell us what you're looking at today and what you hope to see in the future for Elmore County.
Well, in our network condition today, as you can see on this chart, 75% of that network is grading in that good to excellent category. We're down to 25% that are in that poor to in some cases fair condition. Our goal is to get at least into that 90% range. And I think if you look at those numbers, you may go, well, that's not much of a change from 55 to 25. But if you think about over that 17 years period, we're also keeping the roads that were in that 45% range there, plus elevating the rest of our network. So we felt like that we're doing a good job. We're making some adjustments. We're doing some different things. We're going to start looking at some things like cold in place recycling that we haven't ventured off into yet, because in some cases we didn't have the build up to get there. But I think we're headed on the right track, and now that we actually have some additional resources coming in over the last couple of years, I think we're going to be able to definitely in a handful of years, you'll be able to look back at our network, and we'll be getting to a point where we're achieving that 90-10 calculation that a lot of us are going for. I don't think we'll ever get to 100, but we'd like to. So.
Thank you. We don't have much time for questions. If you have any questions, enter them into the chat. We'll just take a couple more minutes here if you have it. In the meantime, while there are any remaining questions coming in, Richie, tell us a little bit about some advice that you may give to agencies who are experiencing budget shifts. With the infrastructure bill coming down the pike, there's a lot of question marks in people's mind. What would you recommend to people as they see their budgets changing?
Well, with the infrastructure bill being passed, I think there's going to be a lot of opportunities for local government to take advantage of investments in preservation and the different techniques. I think if you haven't already started being able to communicate these needs and be able to have a game plan on how to maximize the use of those dollars and make them affect generations beyond what a typical project would impact right now, I think that would be some of the most key advice. There's a lot of good opportunities in the infrastructure bill that yet to see, but the way they're written up and the way they've been communicated so far, it seems like there's a lot of different opportunities for local governments to be able to leverage that money and be able to make some really good improvements to their the network.
Thank you. Yeah, that's great advice. We really only have one question in the chat. Javier asks if I could get into how the constraint factor is assumed or calculated on this calculator, and I'm happy to do that. On the cost benefit value calculator, the question is, how is this figure, the average annualized daily traffic constraint, calculated? And it is not calculated automatically. Typically, we see these numbers range anywhere between 4 and 10. And again, if you look back at the formula, what that does is apply a universal constraint factor to all of the segments. So it doesn't change any of the priorities. Essentially, it's up to the user to use your judgment. Oftentimes, the way I do this, when I use this calculator, I'll calculate all my road segments with the auto assumed 7 as the constraint factor. And then if I get a bunch of answers, for example, my CBV might be from 0.35 as my lowest to 375 as my highest CBV. What I'll do is toggle this number around to see if I can put all of those within the bounds of 1 to 100. And so it's a little bit of a guess and check. But again, that's all in the name of making it more readable and understandable for anyone who you're presenting this to. It doesn't change any of the outcome or the priority of the roads. Any other questions for Richie before we all depart? We are delighted to have you, Richie, and congratulations on the Sorensen Award. The work that you have done for Elmore County is absolutely remarkable, and I think over 17 years, the hard work is paying off, and it is I think change is incremental, especially in this situation. And for us to see the example of what it looks like after 17 years of hard work is really delightful and encouraging. And that every mile matters is really important to hear and refreshing to see it all come to life. So thank you for your time and your expertise. Would you add anything else to that?
Oh, I think a lot of the tools that were shared today, not necessarily just from what Elmore County has done. I think there's so many good tools that y'all have put out there for local governments to take advantage of. I'm kind of jealous that a decade and a half ago we didn't have some of this already in place to where we could take advantage of it. So a lot of people that are getting into their network preservation now have a lot more information to go off of. So I'm very grateful for that and what the industry has done through y'all.
Well, thank you for all your work in the industry as well. Thank you for joining us, everyone. If you have any questions, you can always email us. We will send follow-up via email to you all about the additional learning opportunities coming up. So thank you so much. Thanks, Richie.
Thank you.